test. Live as in you would like us to begin? All right, good evening, and thank you to those that are here in person, and we know that we've got a live stream and the ability to watch this after as well. So appreciate folks that are watching at home, either live with us or at some point in the future. I'm Mike Redmond. I'm the superintendent of the Shakopee Public Schools. Joined this evening at the Our Community, Our Schools, The Path Ahead Forum by our vice chair of our school board, Judy Tomzik, and then by three of our teachers, Wade Laughlin, Virginia Wold, and John Jaskin. And the focus of this evening's forum is classroom impact. And really this came about at our first two forums. The bulk of questions actually kept coming back to classroom experiences. Hey, what's it like for a student? Hey, how are teachers doing after the district made the $7.45 million in budget cuts prior to this school year? And I did my best to answer those questions, but felt, there's a heck of a lot more perspective that could be added by the experts. And so we've gone to the source. We've brought three current teachers in to really talk about those things. And Judy Tomzik and I will talk about some general Levy information, and then we'll turn it over to our resident experts and what's going on in our classrooms. At each of these presentations, I think it's really important to begin with the why. And the why for us is our students. We start talking about operating levies, and really, it often quickly kind of devolves into, hey, we're talking about money, we're talking about finance, we're talking about all kinds of things. But we're a service organization, and our primary purpose for being is to provide services. And the service we provide the most of is learning opportunities for our kids. And so we want to make sure that that's our focus as we talk about an operating levy. It always comes back to that why, and that why is our students. As tonight we're talking about classroom impacts, we've shared some slides at previous presentations. We've done a community survey this spring. We did one 2 years ago in the spring, and again, it's a continuation of connecting with the community and listening to what the community has to say. But I thought one of the more compelling slides that was prepared after that survey is this one, where 84% of our community said they agree to this statement: I have trust and confidence in the men and women who are teaching the kids in our public schools. And we're going to be talking about the path ahead for our school district and our community. Our district is facing a future with structural budget deficits. We certainly, after cutting the nearly $7.5 million, our budget is balanced for this current school year. It's balanced for next school year due to those budget cuts. But then we get into the 23-24 school year, and we're projecting budget deficits. And that's due to the structural budget imbalance, where simply we are not receiving enough in state funding to adequately continue to provide the same level of service. And so, like I said, we're projecting budget deficits in the 23-24 school year, and also then projecting to make another $5.082 million in budget cuts prior to the 23-24 school year. Or the other path is to increase ongoing annual operating revenue. And really the only viable way to do that is through a voter-approved operating levy. Here's a picture of the school district financial projections, and really it just shows in numbers what I just talked about, a balanced budget this year and next. And then you see those kind of nasty red circles in the bottom of the three columns on the right, showing that projected structural deficit in 23-24, 24-25, and the 25-26 school years. And again, if you gave me 12 seconds to talk about our situation, this slide would be the one I would pick. We have a choice between two paths, either a voter-approved operating levy or additional budget cuts before the 23-24 school year. Been talking a bit about budget, and I think it's important to bring that back to how do we spend our operating revenue? I alluded to earlier that we're a service organization, and our primary service is student learning. And so approximately 60% of our operating budget is spent on teachers, the salary and benefits for our teachers who provide those learning services to our students. An additional 20% is spent on all the other staff in our district, the support staff and everybody else. So about 80% of the money we spend is on people, which is pretty typical in a service industry, in a service business, and ours is serving our students and our community. These slides, I apologize, or maybe I guess if you're a Green Bay Packer fan, you maybe like that, so I should be apologizing to the Viking fans, but so I'm not real thrilled with the green and gold here, but purple would be better. But our finance department, we asked them, put together a way that we can answer the question, how is our district spending our money? And really, what proportion of that is going to student-based activities and what is going to the other things like admin and some of those pieces. And in a school district, all of our expenditures are coded in what's called UFARS coding, and I won't go into that tonight, but they're put into categories, and those categories get separated, and you can see here, the ones in yellow, those are student-based categories. The ones in green, those are the other things. And I've heard loud and clear in my almost 3 years in the community, and I know our school board members have, that our district, our community values are, we want to spend a high proportion of our money on student-based things and less on other. In other words, we want the money that goes to our school district to be spent on things closest to kids. This chart breaks that down, breaks it by category, but lumps it into that student-based versus other. And you can see the most recent year on this chart has the highest percentage, 84.36% of our operating expenditures went to student-based activities. And the other, the remainder there. And that is the best over, the most recent 5-year period. So we have been listening, we have been making those changes, we have been taking action.
I'm going to mention something about that one too, the one before. There we go. Okay. Over the last several months, this is the question that really comes up the most often, just as Dr. Redmond said. The second green line shows us the administrative costs, and at 8.9%, it's clear that Shakopee School District runs lean, that money is going toward the things that especially matter, what we do our mission, that's kids.
Thanks, Judy. Yeah, and this bar graph then shows that over that 5-year period, and you can see the most recent one, the one on the right side, has the highest yellow bar. In other words, the greatest percentage of our operating expenditures being on student-based. And then we can take that data, and again, it's all been financially audited. This is the data every school district reports to the Department of Ed in the same way. So it's great comparative data from district to district. And we've taken and compared that as we do many other things. We compete against our comparable districts in athletics and activities. When we do contract negotiations, we take a look at these as well. And you can see on this list, Shakopee is second behind Bloomington. The goal would be to have Shakopee move ahead of Bloomington on this list, but second out of this pretty extensive list of comparable districts, we're moving in the right direction. This is another slide that we've used quite often, and this comes from the auditors. And again, we haven't audited, currently in the process, which we do every fall, of auditing the previous year's expenditures and revenues. But the prior year audited results are here. And what this shows, where the bar is in red. And one side is revenue and one side is expenditures per student. And then the gold bar is the metro average and the gray bar is the state average. And you can see that we trail both of those other bars, both in terms of revenue in and expenditure out. And this slide really talking about the value for money. Even though we've been spending nearly $1,900 less than the metro average per student, our district has been competing quite well in terms of providing services to our students and community. Then we made the $7.45 million in budget cuts. The losses from these $7.45 million in budget cuts included over 50 classroom teaching positions. I know that our staff, I know that our teachers are going to do the best they can to continue to provide the highest quality services to our students and our community, but there's no way when you lose that number of trained, skilled professionals and all the other positions that were cut that we can do this year everything that we were able to do next year. I think I meant this year, not next year. We're not able to do everything we were able to do last year, this year. This is another slide that compares our district to that same list of other school districts. And you'll notice on this, we're the only district on this list that has no voter-approved operating levy. And in fact, we could compare ourselves to all the other districts in the metro area. We would be the only school district without a voter-approved operating levy. And now I'm going to turn it over to Judy Tomzik.
All right. Dr. Edmond talked about our two paths, so let's take a closer look at what each path will mean for our community and, of course, for our students. This is a sample of what the ballot looks like, or at least part of the ballot. And a yes or a no vote. Shall the increase in the revenue proposed by the board be approved? And if our voters answer yes to this, that will raise $866 per pupil to generate money to take care of many of our issues. However, this might be a little bit confusing when people go into the into the voting booth, because it doesn't mean that your taxes are going to raise $866. This is a graphic that has been developed that I think really points out that idea. If you live in the average priced home in Shakopee of $317,000, it means when you vote yes for the first one, it means that your taxes will go up $409 a year. And because of that, it will raise $866 of funding per student. So if that first one passes, here's what it means for our students. It eliminates projected structural budget deficits in 24, 25, and 26, which, of course, we can't have those, so it has to happen. It's also the restoration of some of the budget cuts that were made at the end of this last school year. So many of the classroom teachers will be restored, counselors will be restored. And I think it's really important to note that almost $2 million of the budget cuts will still be in effect. It does not put everything back in. We are very thoughtful of our voters and want to make sure that we can run a school district that provides the necessary elements for our students and our staff, but also considers our voters, because that's important too. And here's the details. I really can't even read that. I'm going to have to go to my glasses here. Okay, the specifics of if you vote for question number 1, it restores classroom size targets, and a little bit later, our teachers are going to be talking about classroom size and how important that is. It will bring back 5th grade band, 2 EL teachers, 2.5 high potential teachers, 2 counselors at the high school, 2 intervention paraprofessionals at the middle schools. At West, it will bring back the security position. Elementary schools will have bring back 3 intervention teachers. ACT students will receive fee payments that were taken out because of the budget cuts, and college in the schools concurrent enrollment courses will be put back in. That's if there's a yes vote that comes out for the first question. The second question, a yes vote on here, will generate $400 per pupil. And it's worth mentioning that if the first question passes, we'll still be on the low end of comparison with other school districts for a levy. This one will bring us almost up to the metro average of per pupil expenditures. And yes to question number 2 will bring back, improve compensation for our teachers. Our teachers are on the very low end of metro average for pay. We lose a lot of good teachers because of that. And of course, there are costs associated with losing teachers, replacing them, the hiring process, the training of teachers that are new to the district. So there are a lot of good reasons that we want to make that, get closer to that metro average. We will also, if the second one passes, make additional improvements to class size targets, excuse me, to reach metro average. Increased fine arts and activity offerings will be included, and it will shorten the walking distance for grades 9 through 12 to 1.5 miles rather than the 2 that we have in place this year. But now let's look at that other path. If voters fail to approve an operating levy, it's going to mean budget cuts again. Over $5 million in budget cuts prior to the 23-24 school year. So that's on top of the cuts that we had at the end of this school year. Additional class size targets increases. So as large as classes are this year, they will be larger if this doesn't pass. Further teacher cuts, 60% of cuts will equal about 40 full-time employees. A double share of the budget cuts will be applied to athletics and activities. And the reason why that's double is we did not cut athletics and activities with these most recent cuts. If the levy fails, we'll have to do double on some of the budget cuts for athletics and activities. We will also be restructuring and eliminating some programs, alteration of school schedules, save on busing and things like that, proportional cuts across the entire district. There will be longer student walking distances at elementary and middle school. It won't increase high school because right now, currently, the high school is at the max distance allowed. At previous forums and similar events, the most common questions have revolved around how the recent $7.45 million in budget cuts are impacting our teachers and students in the classroom. And we thought the best way to respond to those questions would be to call on the experts. And we have 3 experts in attendance with us here tonight. Elementary teacher, Virginia Wold, her present school is Red Oak Elementary. She started in the district in 2005. Middle school teacher John Jaskins. Present school, he's at West Middle School. He started in the district at 2001. And high school teacher Wade Laughlin, he's at the high school and he started in the district in 2005. And they're going to share with us some of their thoughts. There's some questions that we've generated to get some insight and get a peek inside those classrooms. Our first question is, what inspired you to become an educator?
It's all that keeps going through my head is my daughter saying on my way out the door to come to this, "You're a public speaking teacher, Dad. You'll be just fine." And now I'm freaking out, but I'll try. I graduated from college in 2002 with a degree in computer science, and in the kind of sort of emotional crisis that only a 21-year-old can have, I decided I didn't want to use it. I didn't want to go and work in computer science. I wanted to do something that mattered. So I joined the AmeriCorps program, which signs you up for a year of national service, and I worked for Habitat for Humanity in New York City for a year, working mainly in the construction because I thought housing was a way to have that effect on the world that I really wanted to have. I continued that. I re-upped and did another year in AmeriCorps in Minneapolis, and I was working doing maintenance in public housing in Minneapolis. And I was living in St. Paul at the time. My sort of day ended near Jenny Lind Elementary School in North Minneapolis, and some of the other people I was in AmeriCorps with asked me, they said, "We're really desperate for tutors. Would you be willing to stay after your shift and work with some third graders doing math support?" And I thought, well, I'm about an hour away from home. I'm covered in grease from changing toilets all day. Might as well stick around and help some kids with some math. And I realized I had that moment, I think that most educators can tell you about, where it's like, this is what I was meant to do. I felt truly that that was my calling. And because I'd been in AmeriCorps for 2 years, I had an education award from the national government, sort of similar to the GI Bill, those of you who are familiar with that, to go back to school. And I said, I'm going to go back to school nights and weekends to become a teacher. While I was doing that, I actually worked in a classroom at a EBD school for students with emotional and behavior disorders for a year teaching music, strangely enough, before I was lucky enough to get hired here in 2005. My wife also went back to school and got her degree, and I remember her telling me, you need to apply in Shakopee. They're hiring teachers, there weren't that many jobs available at the time. And I remember saying to her, you mean Valley Fair? I didn't know that there was a city here. Well, in the same month, we both were lucky enough to get hired. We got married here, and that was 16 years ago and 3 kids. And so I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to get a chance to talk to people about what's going on in our classrooms.
Thanks, Wade. My path was a little bit more straightforward. I always knew that I wanted to be a teacher because I've always gotten a lot of joy and a sense of accomplishment from learning, and I wanted to inspire that in others. Education is such a remarkable gift that can give kids such an unlimited opportunity to set them up for their futures, and I've always wanted to be a part of that. I see the value that education has, and that educational experiences and relationships that you build can last a lifetime, even if they start at the elementary level.
Thanks, Virginia. So my path, I grew up in a house of educators. So both my parents were educators throughout their careers. My mom at 75 is still a Spanish teacher in Arizona for the Spanish club out there. So I grew up with parents as teachers, so it was kind of a natural fit for me. And I knew right away from student teaching that I'd made the right choice. Wade, you alluded to just kind of that rush that you get when you're working with a student, and that light bulb goes on, right? And you experience that once, and it's like, oh yeah, this is it. This is great. And I'm lucky enough, 23 years later, I still get that rush from students in my classroom, and that light bulb goes on, or they kind of break out of their shell and they answer a question that they've they're not comfortable answering. But so yeah, that was my path.
How are your classrooms different this year than in previous years?
I can start this one. I was one of the many teachers impacted by cuts this past year when the levy did not pass. I am an elementary high potential teacher, and previously we had a full-time high potential teacher at every elementary building in the district, and now we are all half-time. And so that cuts the amount of students we are able to serve. And we got creative and we did some problem solving. We restructured some courses, and we're doing everything that we can to maximize the amount of services that we can provide. But of course, the hours in our day are finite. And so having those positions cut in half have made a huge impact in what we are able to do. And high potential serves kids with a high academic ability. And that gift also creates a need. They deserve service to meet them at their level as well. And so that has really been challenging to accept, that we are just not able to meet those needs at the same level that we used to be able to, even though we are absolutely doing our best. Similar things can be said about intervention and English language learner teachers. They were also cut. And so they are working harder than ever to provide the same level of exemplary service as they've always done. But when you are short teachers, it's just not possible. So we're doing the best that we can, and we still want the community's trust and confidence in the work that we're doing, but we definitely need more of us to continue to do the job that we had been doing.
I would say the biggest thing I notice is just the number of students in my classroom. So I teach math. My largest class is 38, sixth graders. So as you can imagine, gets a little bit interesting at times. But when you get those increased numbers, it just brings about challenges that you have to then try to figure out. And so whether it be physical space, whether it be, same number of teachers, more students, how do I try to get to these students, answering questions. So we're trying to get creative, trying to problem solve, trying to figure out ways that we can still provide the quality education that our students deserve. And so those challenges, we'll continue to work through those. We'll like I said, we're working together, working with, each other, trying to bounce ideas off each other. Have you tried this? Still a work in progress, and it probably will be. Teaching is a work in progress, right? To anybody that says, I've got it figured out, you can probably say, yeah, not sure I agree with you there, right? But there's always things that you're looking to improve upon. And so, yeah, we'll continue to face those challenges, but we'll continue to strive to bring the education that our students deserve.
Working at the high school this year, I work primarily with 11th graders, and that's a huge year for students trying to prepare for the next step in their life. And that's a point where you can really try to reach out and get a kid to realize what they need to do to get to achieve what they want. It's very, that those challenges are multiplied by, like John said, the sheer amount of students in a classroom. He mentioned the struggles of trying to actually instruct that many students and work with each of them. For me, also 11th graders, their number one biggest fear is embarrassing themselves in front of people. This year with class sizes also 30, 38, and 39, there's a lot more of a chilling effect when students walk in. I think all of us who are adults can imagine what it would be like to walk into any kind of session, something at work where you're required to ask a question or participate in something, how much more difficult that would be with almost 40 people in the room. So there's a definite chilling effect there, as well as a warming effect because the room is so full of people. That's more of a literal problem. As far as this year, I also, I'm lucky enough to teach the University of Minnesota's first-year writing class, CIS, College in the Schools. And I've done that for about the past 10 years or so. Seniors have an opportunity to take this upper-level class and earn 4 U of M credits, which are worth more than ever. And students do not have that opportunity this year. So that's something that I'm not doing, and so they're not able to do it, so seniors this year won't be able to have that. I also just need to point out as a note that it really does weigh on us, the idea that we know that every kid in our packed classrooms is somebody's child. My daughter is one of the 6th graders in Mr. Jaskin's math class, and so I know that that's not just a hypothetical or something that's going on in some sort of alternative reality, that that's something that she's in every day. I have 2 sons at Sweeney Elementary School, and my 3rd grader will not be in HP this year. And so he doesn't have those services, and I got to hear my 4th grader tell my 3rd grader, oh, Miss Larson's working with young scholars. I don't think she's going to be able to work with you this year. And so that's something that we actually, I experience the changes in the classroom. The biggest impact for me is at my house. With my children, my wife also teaches math at West, and she drives back and forth first hour every single day because they can't move the 2 school classes together for the algebra class she's teaching. And so she has to drive back and forth and teach East using a Google Meet while she's at West one day and then switch off the next day. And I think anybody can tell you that's not ideal. I go back to what Virginia said before, that's not what our students deserve. And we just want to give them those experiences as best we can. That's what we're hoping for.
Thank you all so much. I've been hearing so much from people about, so what is a couple more kids in the classroom? What difference does that make? And I think you're making that pretty obvious to us. It makes a big difference. Next one. What are key elements that you've found provide the best learning environment?
So I would say for that one, building that rapport with students is so critical. Having that relationship, bringing that anxiety that a lot of students feel, bringing that down. If you've got that relationship with that student, you've got that rapport built up, things just become a lot easier for the student, whether it's they're more confident, again, they're willing to maybe, like Wade said earlier, they might be willing to kind of put themselves out there a little more if you've got that rapport built. They know what they can expect in the classroom. And that just becomes such a critical component in there in a classroom. Having that relationship, kind of knowing what's happening in a student's life, right? That's really important too, because it might be a Monday and student is completely off. A little bit about that student's background. They've shared some things with you. You've got a better understanding of, this and this may be going on in this student's life. Or, you can pull that kid aside and say, hey, I notice you're not kind of your normal self here. What's going on? How you doing? How you feeling? Anything going on in the classroom or at home or whatever? And if the kid's got that relationship with you, they're more likely to open up, right? And then you can you can kind of work through some of those issues and some of those things that are happening. So I really think that relationship, just probably for me, the most critical part.
I couldn't agree more. It's all about the relationship. Regardless of how many students we have in class, it's still that greeting the student on the way in, telling them to have a good day on the way out, and somewhere in between learning something about them and some way to connect with them. We're lucky enough to have worked here a long time. I think we've all gotten feedback on our teaching. And I tell you, one bit of feedback I've never gotten was, oh, that lecture you gave to everyone you broadcast was so interesting. Kids don't really say that. That's not really how they get involved in education. It's that little sitting down with each of them and knowing something about them. I know you're really into fantasy football, so the next nonfiction article we picked, I happened to pick one for you to read that's about the metrics of fantasy football or something along those lines. Those are what we use to get kids involved in school and try to hook them.
I think if there's one thing we learned during this last year of COVID from hybrid learning and distance learning was we relearned, because we knew it already, but we relearned how important those relationships really, really are. So that's good to hear. And that's kind of a segue into our next question. What's one of your best classroom or school memories over the past year?
Well, I had a really fun opportunity that a former student reached out to me, and she's now working as an engineer. And she was very grateful for her education that started in Shakopee schools, and I had been her 5th grade teacher, and she was looking to give back. And she was especially wanting to inspire kids in the area of science, technology, engineering, and math. And so we had a great time going back and forth about what she might be able to do and how she might be able to get involved. And it was just such a full circle moment that brought me back to why I wanted to be an educator. That relationship that we built when she was a 5th grader stuck with her. And now she's working as an engineer. She had had a lot of academic success, and she saw that value of education, and she wanted to give back to other kids as well.
Hands down for me, it was the day we came back from distance learning and actually got to have kids in the classroom trying to teach math over Google Meets. Can you put your paper a little close? No, that's too close. No, it's upside down now, right? Like it was very, very challenging to be able to have students in front of me and where I can, point out, okay, let's take a look at this step. Oh, we missed this. Oh, your multiplication was wrong here. Let's see. So much easier and so much more productive. So having those kids back, even though, we had still plenty of challenges with kind of the every other day, it still made things challenging. It was just so great having them back. And one of the things I found at that point, we had 14, 15 students in the classroom. And even though it was a shorter period of time, boy, I really got to know those students well because it was, 13 to 15 kids as opposed to a larger amount, right? So you could have conversations every single day with each kid that you could get in depth. So I really felt like at the end of that, even though it was a shorter period of time, that I really knew those students well as a result of that. So
on a similar, again, back to the theme of the personal connection, I remember coming back last year and talking to kids before class started every day. And I had one student who I couldn't really get her to engage in conversation with me at all. And it was really hard with the mask on too, but you'd always, try to what did you do this weekend? How are your other classes and everything? And I couldn't get her to really say a word to me until one day she came in, she didn't have her glasses on. I said, what happened to your glasses? She said, I was studying by my bed and I kind of knelt down and I broke them. Now I can't really see. So we kind of rearranged class and got her where she could see things better, and then she started to talk a little bit. And as the year wore on, I actually didn't have her in class anymore, but almost because of how few students there were in the building on those hybrid days, I used to just see her in the hall and kind of hunt her down and just check in with her and ask her how her classes were going, and just that long work that it takes to build that relationship. And I emailed her mom a few times and just wanted to see what was going on at home and figure out a few things that she was struggling with. And she told me it was okay. I talked to her this week about sharing the story in front of her. She said, that's okay. So I'm not going to say her name, but she approached me at the beginning of the year, this year, and she was like a completely different person. I first said, I can't believe you came to see me all the time. I came to see you last year. She said, yeah. And I'm working, I've been working on the tech crew recently, and I'll be working on the musical and tech crew. I joined the Black Student Union, and I told all my kids in Link that they should be involved in theater. And I was like, you were in Link this year? You were a Link leader? This is the most incredible thing that I've seen. And I think that's what keeps motivating us. We had the question earlier about what motivated us to start teaching. I think a lot of us in the business know that teaching has a pretty high attrition rate, especially in the first 3 years. I think those are the kinds of experiences that keep us teaching, keeping us, like John said, that excited for those moments and still getting that rush year after year. But for me, hands down, that was the one experience I'll hold on to from last year into this year.
It's really good to hear that there were good moments last year, as much as there were challenging moments for sure. And I've loved hearing these stories. Thank you so much.
But the question, Judy, for you and I, we haven't been in a classroom for a while. It kind of makes me miss the classroom. Thank you all for sharing that. At this point, let's see. Well, it's the reminder, in terms of ultimately we serve the community, and we work for the community. The Shakopee Public Schools and community taxpayers will decide which path forward and what kind of school district that we want to have moving forward. And like we've both talked about, Judy and I, we've got some experts from the classroom here this evening, and now I feel my answers, I thought they weren't great before at the previous forums when I tried to talk about the classroom impact. I now feel they were wholly inadequate, so thank you for that. No, you guys did a great job, and I appreciate that. But they're here to answer other questions, so if you've got questions, there were cards for people to write those on. Certainly be for our experts in the classroom, and we're certainly happy to answer other questions pertaining to the operating levy, which is the topic of this forum. I don't see like a huge stack of questions in your hand yet, Tiffany. Anything, all right, you guys just talk for a while while we're waiting for some questions to come in. Sometimes you go, oh darn, I was going to talk about that and I didn't. Anything like that to bail a poor superintendent with a microphone out?
I think one thing I have written down in my list that someone handed me at home of things I have to cover. Again, as a parent, this is something that's really on my mind often, and we've been here long enough to see colleagues we've worked with leave our district for greener pastures, and we have some incredible educators in our district. And in fact, I've gotten the feedback from people who have left who comment on the things that are different where they work now versus working here. And I had somebody say to me last year who left this district, they said, anybody at our school could come over to my school right now and be the best teacher there. And to me, that's something I think about, and I think about a lot with my family. Obviously, it's a point of pride for me working here at the high school, but also the people who aren't staying here are people who I envisioned my kids having. My wife and I are 100% vested in education, and one of that ideas was that when our kids came up through the system, we would have a good idea of what the different teachers were like and what the different offerings were like. And watching some absolutely incredible, dedicated educators walk out the door for all sorts of reasons. But we mentioned teacher cuts, but there's also the idea that in the free market, people are free to leave. And when they do that, oftentimes they say things like, it was really hard to leave here, but then for me, my heart breaks knowing that that's somebody my kid is not going to be able to have in class. And so that's a real impact for me as a parent living in Shakopee.
All right, we've got a question from the audience, and I think this is the first time I've actually read it appropriately, so I'm improving forum number 3 before answering. How has the school district been operating since 2017, 2018 without a voter-approved operating levy? And I'll attempt to answer that, and then certainly would love the other folks up here to join in with different perspectives. And there's one slide, and we talked about that value for money, and I think, we've done that. We've left some of the finance slides out that we have at other times, and you can go back to 2003, and if you take a look at the state, the general aid that goes to schools, and compare that to the rate of inflation over that time period, it falls short. And even, this current school year, we did get an increase from the state in terms of that per pupil or general aid funding. That increase was 2.1%. And unfortunately, currently at this time, the annual rate of inflation is somewhere in the neighborhood of 3.4%. And so you can see just with those numbers, and I used to be a social studies and an economics teacher, that it becomes tough to do the things you want to do. If the revenue coming in isn't keeping pace even with the rate of inflation, you're constantly making decisions and you're constantly trying to, this phrase, do more with less. Well, the reality is you're trying to do the best you can with less. You can't do more with less. And I think you've heard from the three teachers up here the kind of passion and care that they bring each and every day. And I think it's a credit to them when we talk about, hey, we've hung in there pretty well, but it's a tough path forward without a voter-approved operating levy. And I'll even allude to, 25 years ago, the name that those operating levies went by they were typically referred to as an excess levy. 25 years ago, they were for school districts that elected to purchase extras, go a little bit further. Well, today, and the reason that every other district in the metro area has a voter-approved operating levy is when state funding has not kept pace with the rate of inflation, you need additional revenue just to continue doing those things that are necessary. And so we've been struggling to meet that challenge. I think it's the great efforts of our teachers and our other district employees to do the best they can. And then again, if you remember the slide, that was all before we cut $7.5 million. And so, again, trying to do the best you can, but you simply can't do what we did last year with 50 fewer teachers and a whole bunch, fewer other employees. So thoughts on that topic or something related to that?
I also have kids in the district. I have a senior this year and an 8th grader. I guess just one of the other concerns that I have is just, especially with the activities and those things. That's such an important part, not only to my own kids, but to a lot of kids, right? And having those experiences outside of the classroom and how that just develops the student, how important that is. And so, just as a parent, I mean, that's one of those things on my mind that does make me, a little bit nervous what if there aren't quite as many of these extracurricular things that my 8th grader can be a part of. That's definitely on my mind as well.
Also addressing the issue of activities and athletics. So many people over the years that you talk to will say that activity, drama, football, speech, whatever, that made me who I am today. That isn't, we used to call those extracurriculars, but they're co-curriculars because they really are important to the overall development and education of so many of our young people.
Other things that you'd like us to address, and I'm comfortable if you just kind of want to raise a hand and share. Yeah. And I'll try to repeat that. The question was, it's really for the teachers with the increased number of students in classes. How has that impacted your ability to keep up with lesson planning and curricular development? And did I get most of it? Perfect.
I can start that one. It definitely has made it more challenging. First of all, because with more students, there's more differentiation involved. So you're planning for students at more levels. So you have to be very familiar with a lot of resources at a lot of levels and have a plan for how to differentiate for those students. Also, we all talked about how important relationships are and building relationships with students. But also, students need feedback, specific and timely feedback to drive their learning. And the more students you have, the more challenging it is to provide them with very meaningful feedback. And that really also ties into your lesson planning because you want to plan what kind of feedback you need to give depending on what you're trying to teach.
Yeah, I think at the high school level, as a high school English teacher, it's hard to overstate that impact of having wanting to go over something as personal and as critical and as varied as writing, with close to about 78 of those pieces of writing coming in when we collect an assignment. It takes a long time to do that, to give that feedback. And there's all sorts of research saying that the sooner the student gets that feedback, the closer it is to when they're actually trying to demonstrate what they've learned, the better they'll do. Again, going back to primarily right now, I'm teaching 11th grade English, and we have, over the last few years, been operating on this idea of having a higher standard for students to meet, but giving them multiple opportunities to redo and rework assignments, because that's really where the learning happens. I think anyone who's ever learned any difficult skill knows that getting it the first time is not really realistic. So giving those opportunities, we can give more of those opportunities the fewer students we have in class. That's just the long and short of it. I think like Virginia said earlier, there's a finite amount of time in the day, and that directly impacts our ability to really push learning that way.
This question says, is there any data on how special education caseloads have increased? We talked about general education class sizes, but what numbers do we have for our special ed kiddos, and also counselor caseloads before and after? It's actually a really, really tough question to answer. Special education, we did, in essence, primarily proportional cuts across the district. When it comes to special education, there are a number of mandates from the government in terms of, teacher to pupil ratios, things like that. We've got district policies. And so we actually looked to them for kind of half of a proportional cut. And where they did most of the cutting were kind of peripheral services, administration, and those type of things. And then obviously, there are some times where you're not quite at a maximum caseload, but the best thing for kids would be to add an additional section or split that section. We don't have that ability to do that currently. And so we are, at those maximums far more often than we would have been previously. And so that's a little bit of a kind of a different thing. In terms of counselors and other support, at the high school, last year we had 8 counselors, this year we have 6. And so and I think it talked about the caseloads, so you've got, I'm going to use a number that divides into that, even though it's not the exact student number, but I'm going to use, you got 2,400 kids, you got 8, that's 300. Well, now you got 6, so it's 400. And that's kind of the change in that. And again, it's that part of, and I thought Virginia said that really well. There's, time is really the ultimate constraint. There's only so much time in a day for each counselor to meet with kids. So anything to add on that topic?
Well, I was just going to say, too, with the counselors, more than ever in the classroom, that is such a needed, those men and women doing that job is such a needed, it's so needed, right? Because there's just so many things going on for these students, right? And having that counselor, that person there that can really support them, kind of help them through some of the challenges, some of the difficulties they may be experiencing. It's just critical, right? And like I said, seeing in 23 years of teaching, I've noticed it more in the last few years than ever before. And to be fair, it's probably only going to become more. The issues are going to continue. So having those men and women in those counseling positions, critically important.
I was just thinking of an image. We had a fire drill last Thursday, and so every student in our building went outside. And I thought of that, exactly what John was talking about, how critical those services, counselor's office, and I looked at the mass of students outside, and I thought 6 counselors for this group. It's really hard to fathom, to be perfectly honest. And it didn't really strike me until we had a fire drill last week.
And I'm going to take about 2 steps backwards. I thought about talking about it more during the presentation, but just even, we talked about the green and gold slides and trying to get that higher percentage on student-based, and we're doing that. And even when it came to the budget cuts, we really did them in kind of different groups. We did $2,050,000 in permanent budget cuts. That was our first budget cutting. And on that list, there were not things like counselors and those type of supports. That was, there were administrators, and there were things, and again, all the people in those positions were doing quality work, but they were the things furthest away from student learning, furthest away from kids. And even, and you heard Judy then talk about when the operating levy was not passed last year, we made an additional $5.4 million in budget cuts. And of that, we'd like to bring roughly $3.4 million back. And it's the things closest to kids. It's the teachers, the counselors, should the operating levy be approved by the voters this November? Well, if you kind of track that math, we did an initial $2,050,000. There was another almost $2 million in budget cuts. That's a total of $4 million in budget cuts that we made, purposely trying to stay away from, the classroom. And even when we talk about what would be restored, so we're working to do that. And again, it's, when you've been kind of living in this where your revenue doesn't keep up in the form of state aid with inflation, we've learned to live in scarcity. And I know that, any resources we get when we bring in people in counseling roles or teaching roles or those things, the value we get for that is amazing. So I just wanted to digress and go back to a couple other topics. And this is another tough question, but I like that they addressed it to the teachers first. I'll join in here, but it's what message would our teachers have to those who don't have kids in the district? How does the levy impact those without students in the district?
I guess first thing I would say is strong communities have strong schools. I mean, the two are aligned. You can't have one without the other. When you think of just everything that is provided by our youth throughout a community, I mean, that starts at the schools. It starts at home, but it also, the schools are a critical part of that as well. And let's be honest, right? Strong schools make for stronger property values. They make for better workforce in your local community, right? There's so many things that schools do, even more than just for the kids, but just for the community as a whole. So I really, I think, whether it's you've had kids that have gone through, you don't have kids, but maybe, in the future you will be having kids. You don't have kids at all and not planning to, right? This will affect you. We've lost, like Wade said, we've lost so many good teachers that unfortunately we'll have kids coming up that are maybe newborns, whatever, won't have. And so I think there's it's such a wide swath that education covers within a community.
I think a lot of the issues we're having across our whole country right now have a lot to do with workforce. I mean, all of us have had problems being served at a restaurant or finding help in a large department store. And educating our workforce, that's good for every single person. And to not educate them creates a whole lot of new problems. So I think the benefits to everyone, both of my children graduated from Shakopee schools a long time ago. I'm grateful for the education that they received, And I hope to make sure that that continues to happen to our youth.
There's always a part of me that wants to talk like an economist and talk about positive externalities, but I won't. You're welcome, Judy. But it's, I think we get the direct benefits to the students themselves, but there are so many benefits to a community. We have one slide, and it wasn't part of the presentation tonight. It's a three-legged stool. And when you look at strong communities, the kind of communities where people want to live, raise families, retire in, do all those things, they typically have three things. They have a vibrant business community. They have they've got good quality local area government that is investing in the community and investing in, parks and amenities like that. And they have strong schools. And to be quite frank, when those things, when any of those legs on the stool aren't functioning correctly, just like a real life, three-legged stool, it doesn't work well. And so the other thing, and I'm going to talk more from the heart, one of the joys of my job is I get to go out and see learning all over this school district, from our preschool kids to our seniors in high school. And then I get to watch some of the programs and internships. And there's a part of me that actually just goes, oh my gosh, these kids are amazing in what they can do and what they're learning in school. And everybody goes, hey, let's talk about the good old days. And that's fine. But, not too much before my time, we didn't get to things like physics and calculus in high school. Now, tons of our kids do that. I look at the opportunities we have in the academies of Shakopee and those internships and things, and I look at where kids are leaving when they graduate from our district, and it's like, my gosh, it's not a question of whether or not they're going to be successful. It's how are they going to change the world? And so from a selfish perspective, I'm getting older, and I look and go, you know what? They're going to do a great job taking care of me. There are doctors, there are nurses, there are lawyers, they're going to be the next generation of teachers. And so I think there's a lot of ways to look at that. Certainly get that, hey, the kid in the classroom gets the most direct benefit, but there are community benefits, and having a strong, vibrant public school district in that community is a key part of that. In case you're wondering why I do the job I do and why I picked that career, I believe in it strongly. But Tiffany, you're holding out another stack of questions from us? No? I'm good with, if you promise to behave yourself and be nice to us. No, if you raise the hand and ask a question, that'd be great. I'll let our experts, smaller than they are currently, but still, again, we had some resource scarcity then. And the question that I was supposed to read, and that's why they're going like this up there, really was, what were the class sizes like pre-COVID compared to now?
So it's like you teed that one up, because being the math guy, I was looking and did the averages of where I'm at now compared to where I was pre-COVID, a number of years back. And so right now I average roughly around 32, 33 per class. Pre-COVID, I was about 28, 29 per class. So about an extra 4, roughly. But like Virginia said, with every one of those students, right, brings about, additional feedback there, additional, possible things that we're working, saying, okay, yep, we're going to modify for here. So it just adds additional challenges.
Yeah, I would say before this year, there's lots at the high school. We have all sorts of different course offerings, and some of them come with different sizes. But for the core classes, the ones that everybody takes, up until this year, occasionally you might have a class of 28 or 29, and then sometimes, depending on what hour it was and when they would add kids, it might get up to 30, 31. And this year, right now, every core teacher across the board that I know is at least in the 37, and some of them close to 40. And then for some classes, there's a few science classes, phy ed classes around there that are in the 40s.
I think it's worth mentioning that, especially in a science class where you're doing lab work in a room that wasn't meant to accommodate that many students, that adds additional concern.
At the elementary level, our class size targets are smaller, but one big change I've noticed is that it is a lot harder to bump up to get a new section. And so we've seen first and second grade classes get as high as 30 students before they can get another section. And that's a lot of primary kids. And so we're getting added sections a lot later in the school year than has ever happened before, because administrators are having to be so careful about not going over targets, that they have to be absolutely sure that they have the enrollment. And so that's one big change that I've noticed. My daughter is in 3rd grade, and there are 30 kids in her class.
Yeah, and just to clarify, when you said they're smaller, you're talking smaller than the middle level or the high school level, but bigger than previous years.
Yes, so we would have smaller target sizes than a middle or high school class. And so kindergarten and 1st and 2nd grade primary classes, the targets would be in the low 20s, whereas intermediate, 3rd, 4th, 5th, the targets could go up to the high 20s. And we're exceeding that now.
And I think the other piece, we get kids in a classroom, but it impacts, and I was a middle school principal and a high school assistant principal, and I always kind of love doing the scheduling, and it really impacts, the variabilities within the schedule. Things have to be tighter. 2 years ago, class might have run with, X number of students. This year, can't make that work. That bar goes higher, so even though there might have been, 15, 16 kids who really wanted that option, or it was really important, you can't do it, because if you do that there, now you're adding on to those core classes. And so it really restricts a lot of the decision making. And you talked about even, and these are those pieces, and none of this is pleasant. It's, you do it because you have to balance the budget. I think that's the one piece that, that people don't always understand. At the end of the day, we have no choice. We will balance the budget. It needs to be done. And if there aren't resources, you can't spend them. And so even, you talked about getting to that, we do kind of a plus or minus 3, and there's a color coding thing on each elementary section. Well, prior to this year, when it went red, meaning you were 3 above the target, you would actually have gotten 1.0 in terms of full-time equivalent, a full-time teacher. Well, this year you get a half-time teacher, because that's the resources we have to work with. And now you've got and I've heard these folks talk about it, and I love it's the response, because when I say, hey, they're going to do their best, I kept hearing, hey, we're going to get creative, and at some point, there's just not enough creativity to keep doing what you've been doing or what you would like to do.
In regard to classes not being able to be offered at the high school because the numbers aren't high enough, whereas in the past, that would have been okay. Parent told me that her son plans to go to the University of Minnesota, and a class that would help him be admitted to the University of Minnesota is not offered at the high school this year. And I bet there are a lot more stories like that.
All right, kind of have a multi-part question here, and I think this one's primarily for me, but it's more about staffing and some of the community perceptions versus reality. And I know we don't have the slide to be pulled up, but the feeling by the community that high school is administrative heavy. I did speak at Rotary today over the noon hour, and we actually have a slide that shows the number of administrators in a ratio to students going back, back to the 1960s, so over the decades. Well, the year or the decade, it's the current year, the 21-22 school year, that ratio is the highest, meaning it's the most students per administrator of any of those decades going back to the 1960s. And again, that's part of that shaping, and having student-based things be the priority. But I also, mentioned at the Rotary, our ratio of administrators to students at the high school, it's the greatest number of students per administrator. I don't think anybody would argue that being a high school administrator in the calendar year 2021 is easier than it used to be. It's an incredibly, incredibly challenging job. And so, that ratio, it's reality, it's fact, I'll share that, but there's a part of that is concerning to me. And then another kind of follow-up talking about the equity department. Can you speak to how that department is funded? What budget cuts were made in that area? And does the equity department receive funding via grants? We've moved, our equity team is now part of our learning, teaching, and equity department. We think there's great synergy there. We think that they can work well together to serve kids. The reality is the state of Minnesota does a number of I could get you guys to fall asleep real quick. Start talking about categorical funding and school finance. But they do a lot of their funding via what I would refer to as categories. One of them is an area called integration aid, and that is where all of the funding for that part of our learning, teaching, and equity department, that equity team, comes from. And so it has to be used in specific ways. We're considered, and it has to do with proximity to neighbors, something called a racially isolated district. And again, our equity team is working on, we want every kid who walks through the doors to feel they're part of the community. We want them to reach their greatest individual potential. And the reality is that money can only be spent on that. So it's one of those where if we didn't run that program, okay, that kind of cut off a little bit. If we didn't run that programming, we couldn't use that money anywhere else. So it would do absolutely nothing to our operating budget bottom line. So we make sure that we stay within the limits of that particular category of funding, use it for what it's specifically used for, but I can't take that money as a superintendent, nor can Bill Manazzi as a finance director and go, hey, we're just going to use that in our general fund. It has specific purposes attached to it. So hopefully that was what the question was about. Anybody want to jump in on categorical funding, school finance?
I could speak to the equity piece a little bit. Since my position was reduced by 1/2, the new half of my position this year is funded by the Equity Fund, and that is Young Scholars. And the goal of Young Scholars is to increase the diversity in accelerated programming. And so finding academic potential and nurturing that and front-loading some skills in groups that have been historically underrepresented in accelerated programming so that our accelerated population better represents the demographic of our overall population. Because like many districts across the country, our gifted programming is still more white than our overall demographic. And so that means we've got some equity work to do. And so that's a great place where some of that equity money is at work. Serving kids who are being served to reach their potential.
Other questions? Anything? Yeah, please.
Math-wise, consumables, I don't really have anything there, so I guess there hasn't been a change because I don't use any. But probably that answer would be a lot different if there was a science teacher up here, especially. We maybe aren't the best representation for that question.
I know I don't use consumables either, and I can't speak to if they've been reduced.
Well, if you remember, I'll try to touch on this. I talked about how 80% of our operating revenue went to pay for people. That other 20%, and we've talked about what's happened with school funding over the last couple of decades, those type of budgets, anything in kind of that supply area, that's already been, cut way down, lower than it probably should be, and there really isn't anything left there to cut. And so when you've been living in scarcity, you do try to prioritize things. And, that's one perception. I got a list as a superintendent, but public perceptions that I wish people would come in and take a look and really dig in, because when they do, what they find is, oh my gosh, you guys have been operating in scarcity for a long time, and you're pretty darn efficient. In fact, you're amazingly efficient. We're not perfect, but we work really hard to do the best we can and serve kids with the resources available to us.
I can only say at the high school, as an English teacher, we're not consumables heavy, but just the way we have, exactly like Dr. Redmond said, the way we've been operating for as long as I've been here, it wouldn't even come up in conversation if a tech ed teacher could only get a certain amount of materials, like a certain amount of TIG spools for a welding class. They wouldn't even think it worth mentioning to anybody else. They would just figure out a way to make it work while every groups of 3 kids they're all going to share this one or something like that. We're so used to operating in that vein that it doesn't even come up in the usual teacher conversation like class sizes would. The other thing is the people I work with especially, we write a lot of grants. We get things donated. There's lots of ways to figure out, and we're generally a pretty creative and passionate group, and we'll figure out a way to get things done because it's important. But it's so what we're used to that, again, I don't have a spreadsheet or anything like that, but it's so what we're used to that's just how we're used to operating.
I would add one other piece that popped into my head there, and it's going to be your income tax time of year. I don't know any teachers who don't. There's a section on the income taxes where, hey, have you spent, $250 on school supplies or things like that? If so, hey, you get a little tax break here. I don't know any that don't fill that out. And again, those are the pieces that are tough, and we talk about, part of what we're trying to do with our compensation, if question 2 were passed, would be to move our teachers and other areas, support staff, closer to the mid-range of other districts. The folks, and again, you listen to the passion and the care and the connections with kids, most teachers tend to spend money out of their own pockets to stretch those budgets as far as they can. And I think that I'd be remiss if I didn't state that. I think and again, it's one of those you just take for granted, and it's probably not the way we should be running public schools when you get right down to it.
I think we've mentioned several times that being the only metro school that does not have a voter-approved levy, we've been doing really well. And this is another example of that. But there comes a point where you can't keep cutting back. If you're lean to begin with, making it leaner isn't a possibility without hurting kids.
Yeah, please. Yeah, the question was, what do we say to folks in the community who tell you, hey, we can't afford this, especially after the year that they've been through? I can go. I haven't heard that much, and I get that, and there are different challenges. I don't know anybody, I've never met anybody who goes, hey, yeah, I just love paying taxes. But I think what people want to know is there's value for that expenditure. I did hear today, actually on my way into Rotary, and it actually surprised me a little bit, but got pulled aside at the door from another Rotarian who's retired and goes, you know, you should be talking more about the tax cut this year that I got. He goes, I got like a $500 tax cut. I didn't need that. I was good. I wish you'd have just kept it. And I'm like, well, it doesn't work that way. We had some, you know, we had paid off our construction debt, our building bonds. And so there's that piece. And again, there's different challenges. An operating levy does not hit, you know, it's based on the value of property. So there is some, you know, there is some tax fairness in that, if you will. There are also places where if your own individual property taxes increase by certain amounts in a year, that you do have the ability, also based on income, to apply for a property tax refund in some of those. And then I think the folks here talked about it. There's kind of that value, the greater good, the community good, and there's even, you know, I use a school district that I taught and coached in as a great example of this. And again, it's not a perfect answer to your question, but they were two very different districts for quite a period of time. One had, you know, supported the schools, done the operating levy thing, and the other had chosen not to, the community. And literally the exact same houses on the different sides of the road that was the boundary between the two school districts had very different property values, sometimes as much as 10 or 15% difference in the value of that home. So there is, you know, at some point there is, you know, it's about the community values, and I'm talking more about caring for others and student learning, but there is also a piece where healthy communities have strong school systems, and certainly people who have economic challenges, I get that. I tell people I grew up very middle class or working class, and that translates in, there were a lot of times we were pretty darn poor, and so I get that, and I know that there are paths forward in terms of how our property tax system works, and certainly, you know, we're happy to help kind of point them in the direction of those resources and things like that. So it took me on quite a path there. I didn't know I was going, but thank you for that question. Yeah, the question was about kind of, you know, I'd mentioned, you know, we had paid off building debt, and we've got, as all school, you know, I shouldn't say all, but most school districts, especially if they've been growing, depending on the age of their buildings, they provide places for kids to learn, and we've done that, and obviously a community that has grown, you know, in the last decade or so quite rapidly. We continue, some of those, they typically are 20-year loans. And they, you know, sometimes they're a little bit different. And so when they do fall off or get paid off, there is a cost savings to the taxpayers. I know this because I met with Bill Minazzi, our finance director, yesterday. The other thing that he's been working on, and this is just really in the last, I would say, 14 months, and it's something that good finance directors do, and Bill's an outstanding finance director, is they look at all of, you know, that building debt that we have, and they're different loans issued in different years, different terms and things like that, and continually looking at, hey, what a lot of homeowners have done over the last, you know, few years, we could refinance that and save the taxpayers money. The school district, in essence, gets nothing out of that, because the savings goes entirely to the taxpayer. Boy, this microphone's still a little funky, but the savings goes directly to the taxpayers, and that total savings is now over $8 million that he has found in that, and we have refinanced, and the school board has approved. And again, trying to look out, and I would argue Bill's doing his job. We're doing our job. The school board's doing their job. But, trying to make sure that even that debt that we carry for buildings, that it's the right debt at the right interest rate and those things. And so he has kind of continued to do that. And I just happen to know that figure off the top of my head. Not because I carry him around permanently, but we talked about it yesterday. All right, we have just a couple minutes. Anybody want the final question? I would ask our three teachers if, maybe got kind of closing remarks. You guys have done an incredible job. If, John, maybe we start with you, and just kind of anything that you're thinking about as we wrap up here would be great.
I guess as I look at this, I'm going to step out of my teacher role here and into the parent role. The question earlier came up, people dealing with challenges financially during this time, and how can they afford that? And the parent in me says, can we afford not to for our students, right? For our kids, for my kids. When I look at what we had to go through this past year, and what I look at what will happen moving forward, for me, that answer is no, we can't afford not to. This is just too important for our kids. So I guess that's my parting.
Well said, John. I think of something that Wade alluded to earlier. When we were hired, this was a growing district. There were so many teachers hired every year, and this was a district that you could look to that was very healthy. And we all know that, like you said, we have the best teachers. You can look in our classrooms and see such amazing things going on. And so we need to be able to continue to have them funded at a level where we can continue to do all the things that we need to do for our kids.
I think we saw the slide earlier that says that, I think it said 84% of the people in the community say they trust the teachers. I think that's reassuring to see empirically that number. I also think about, we have conferences, I think next week or the week after, and I think about what it's like to sit down across from parents, and I'm always sort of taken aback by how much they trust the teacher. And I think about a strong community. It always feels like a strong community when parents come in and they know about what their kid is doing in school, and they're excited to talk to the teacher. And so I know that, like I said, I know it quantitatively from the slide. I know it emotionally when I think about conferences. And I guess I would say to anybody who's kind of questioning, because I get it, there's a couple things to think about. There's the year that everybody's had. Everybody knows now how little my wife and I make, because it's been on the slide here, so I guess that's out there. So people are struggling. There's also this idea, and again, living in the community, I get it. You drive by the high school where I work from 169, you can see it. And I have people say to me, oh, you guys need money? Well, I saw that gigantic gleam, and that's a nice school you have. And we do. We have an excellent facility. But if you trust us, if you really truly trust us with your child's education, your child's best interest in mind, believe me when I say that this can offer a chance to give every kid the education they deserve. That this is not some sort of whim that we're looking for, or some sort of, oh boy, it'd be great, but I'll be fine without it. This is an absolute necessity. Exactly like John said, we can't afford not to, and I say that as a teacher and a parent. And so if you have that trust in us, at least you trusted us with your kid, which is fantastic. Trust us with the next step, with this idea that believe us when we say that it's necessary.
Thank you so much to the people who are here tonight and the people who are listening and watching. It's, as I sat here tonight and listened to all these stories, it made me really proud to be from Shakopee and to be a retired Shakopee teacher. So it's been good for me. I hope it's been good for everybody else.
I echo your sentiments. Thank you for being here. And this was kind of a new idea. We weren't sure how it would go. I think this is one time where that idea turned out to be even better than expected. I thought our 3 teachers, talking about, hey, what's it really like in the classroom, and what drives you to do the work you do each and every day. And so if you wouldn't mind, join me in giving them a round of applause. I thought they did a great job. And then as we wrap up, a reminder, absentee voting has started. It runs September 17th through November 1st. November 2nd is the operating levy, the ballot, the vote, the election day. That will be held at West Middle School. And again, thank you for those who've taken time out of your busy schedules, both in person and online. We do appreciate it. We're available. Appreciate the questions. Thank you for asking those, and we're always available to provide information. So with that, have a great evening.